when this administration says they're literally no longer going to value human life at any amount. They're not
Yeah.
going to, put a dollar value on human life. They're just going to think about the cost to a polluter, how much it costs a polluter to comply. That's bananas.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people do get that. And I think there's cultural opportunities to come into that conversation, whether it's finding ways to engage people on the fact that this administration is saying that human life doesn't have a dollar value, but we're just going to worry about how much corporations have to spend to
Yeah.
keep your air and your water clean. Um, those are the kinds of things we're looking for, those moments to marry what's happening in our environmental or political environmental space with culture, and then jumping on it and running with it.
Welcome back to The Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy campaigns with the people who design and execute them, unpacking how they think, how they plan, and how they win. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Today we're talking to Pete Maysmith, who has spent more than 30 years leading environmental campaigns to protect clean air, clean water, public lands, and a safe climate. Pete is the president of the League of Conservation Voters, where he oversees the raising and spending of hundreds of millions of dollars, electoral advocacy, and organizing efforts. Pete previously founded and led Conservation Colorado. Prior to that, he held leadership roles at Common Cause, whose mission is to uphold democracy. Pete's experience leading environmental campaigns and protecting democracy makes him someone I really wanted to talk to about the moment we're in, about what it's going to take to build power and protect democratic institutions in the year ahead. Before we dive in, if you find conversations like this useful, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps more people find the show. And let me hear from you. Drop a comment if you've got suggestions about who else I should interview, questions you think I should be asking, or really anything else on your mind. All right, let's get into it. Pete, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. Really appreciate having you here.
Pete, I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So I would love to hear about how you got into this work and what experiences have most shaped how you think about building power.
Yeah. It started when I was young. I'm a Coloradan. Growing up in Denver, my mom was really active in the social justice world, in particular the peace movement and the women's movement. This is the late 70s going into the early 80s. And there's a nuclear production facility at Rocky Flats outside of Denver and Boulder, Colorado. They make these little plutonium bombs that went inside the big nuclear warheads, and triggered the plutonium bomb, and that started the chain reaction to do the massive nuclear detonation. And my mom was very opposed to the country spending the amount of money it was spending on weapons and nuclear weapons, and was worried about the destruction of people on the planet. And so she took my younger sister and I to a protest early one morning when I was in I think it was the 5th grade, when we linked arms with hundreds, thousands of people around this production facility to symbolically block access. It was a peaceful, nonviolent protest. And I didn't understand the Cold War, and I didn't understand MAD, mutual assured destruction for the lingo back in the day. I didn't know anything about that. I was a 5th grader. Here's what I knew. This was important enough that my mom got my younger sister and me up in like the pre-dawn darkness, drove however long it took to get there. It felt like a while. And that to stand in solidarity, physical solidarity with other people as a way to declare what she thought was wrong, and to do something about it, an act of resistance. And that power, what was powerful about that was that we did that with a lot of other people who I didn't know. I mean, total strangers to me, right? And that taught me, I didn't know it at the time, but that was the first kernel of understanding that power comes from people and that's how we can take on whether it's entrenched corporate interest or governmental decisions we don't agree with. It all kind of flowed from that thinking that then was reinforced over lots of
Wow.
conversations,
That's
and other
great.
actions.
What a way to get started. I started also, I think I was 9.
Okay.
Um, there was what had, I guess, been a farm on behind our house
Hmm.
that had just overgrown into this wild field of probably 100 acres. And then one day, bulldozers came and, mowed it out, flattened it out, and they started to build houses there. Um, I wasn't happy about it. So my approach was to go up back there when the workers weren't around and pull up survey stakes.
Ah,
Um,
little
so
monkey wrenching early on, Pete. Little
that's right,
monkey.
right. Well, I'm glad to say I've kept it legal since then, but
Good
it
for you.
didn't stop the development either. So I guess my lesson was you need more than just that to
That's
make
not
a
enough.
difference.
Yeah. Understood.
Yeah.
Understood.
So mobilizing people power, absolutely. And boy, do we need it right now when it's really challenging.
For
I'm
sure.
curious, this is really stressful work. I mean, keeping up with the news is stressful. Thinking about the politics and the dynamics and how to change things. How do you unwind and keep yourself from going nuts from the day to day work that you do?
I guess two things. One, this is it's both hard and stressful work, but I also find it joyous and invigorating. So, even though these times are dark, we have an authoritarian, who is, trying to wrest democratic control of this country away from us, doesn't care about climate change, is actively working to undermine, deeply important policies and things we can do to protect the planet and the people on it. So I like, it's hard and daunting, but it's also invigorating to do it. So partly I get energy just literally from doing it. And I mean, certainly the other thing is just surrounding myself, with people I love. And I've got an amazing family and a fantastic wife and 3, just terrific daughters, and just surrounding myself with them. 2 of them are older, so they're not here, but whenever I can. And then at a purely escapism, I'm a massive soccer fan, and I love watching English Premier League soccer. I'm a Gunner, an Arsenal fan, and so just watching Arsenal play mostly brings a lot of joy. Not every game, but most games it brings good joy.
I'm not a football fan, but it just did make me think about Ted Lasso and
Sure.
how uplifting I found that.
That's right. Absolutely. Ted Lasso was a terrific series, for sure. The real sports even better, but Ted Lasso was great.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it gave me real hope. I mean, the way I think about it sometimes is, I mean, it is unfortunate to live in these dark times when there's so much uncertainty, but at the same time, I try to think about it as an honor that falls to those of us in these times that we have something really important to achieve and to do, and
I think that's right.
not everybody gets that chance.
I think
So
that's right. And I'm a big believer in that we're not given more than we're able to carry. And so even when it feels heavy, we're still able to do it. I just believe that. And so I choose when it feels heavy, and it does at times, that, well, I can do this, and my colleagues and allies, collectively, I mean, we can do this.
yeah, yeah. Um, so before we jump in, just tell us a little bit about LCV and what it does and what sets it apart.
Yeah. LCV is a phenomenal organization. I love been a part of it in a couple different ways for 17 years or so. So LCV, a national nonprofit, we engage and work with climate leaders and decision makers. We do elections, which a lot of our fellow traveler organizations don't engage in, or maybe engage in a small way. We engage in a really big way. Our core belief is that when we elect champions, people who are going to stand up, fight to tackle climate change, to protect our air, our land, and our waters, that when we elect those folks and then hold them accountable, work to make sure that those electoral victories turn into policy outcomes that are better for all of us, better for the planet, and better for the people who live on the planet. That when we do that, we're going to get better outcomes. The other, one of the other really important things about LCV is that we're part of something that we call the conservation voters movement. And that is LCV and our 30 state affiliates. I was just recently in Chicago where I got to spend time with our six of our Midwest affiliates at a conference there. It's really, they're doing the work on the ground, whether it's engaging in local elections, state elections, advocacy, organizing, communications work. They're just connected in with people on the ground. The kind of power that they've built and that then translates into the work that we do and the power that LCV builds. We do that collectively with our state affiliates. And I think that's what really makes LCV such a phenomenal organization to be a part of in all sorts of ways.
I think it's pretty clear how doing the electoral and the advocacy reinforce each other. Does that also create tensions at times?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I would say it creates tensions. I mean, there's always, when we work to elect somebody who is good and maybe even great, but then doesn't do everything that we want him or her to do, sure, there can be tensions there. We want to, our job is to create the political space for someone to step in and author that pro-climate bill or co-sponsor it or vote for it or stand up and speak publicly about it and champion it, or myriad of other things. Those are just some 4 examples, right?
Yeah.
And so if we've elected someone who might be falling short, who isn't doing everything that we want him or her to be doing, sure, that can create some friction and some tension. But I also think that's part of the process and part of the system, and something we can live with, we can work with.
Yeah. Yeah. So LCV issues an annual scorecard of how members of Congress are voting and assigns a numerical score depending on how much they've supported environmental votes. And this year, or 2025 just came out yesterday. Anything about the numbers jump out at you?
Well, for sure. There's a couple things that jump out at me. First off, you should know, everyone should know, listeners should know, we double scored the big ugly bill, the budget reconciliation. That was the bill that the House and Senate passed, Republicans in the House and Senate passed back in the summer, that really unwound much of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was such a momentous piece of legislation to tackle climate change. Now, the result is what they did. They made it more expensive to live in this country, in particular around energy. They made people's energy bills are going up, right? As demand surges, that bill is going to, and a lot of other things this administration are doing, is choking off supply. So we double scored that bill because it is so important from an environmental and from a climate perspective. I think the other thing that I would say that we saw in these numbers is that we have never seen a congressional majority so willfully abandon its responsibilities to protect their own constituents and the Constitution, and instead relentlessly attack the health and safety of our communities and our environment and a free and fair democracy. So we just have seen congressional Republicans toe the line that President Trump has told them to toe, and that is at our expense. Bad environmental outcomes, but also bad outcomes when it comes to people's pocketbooks. They're making their lives more expensive. That's what we saw on the scorecard.
The president's hold over the party is one of those extraordinary dynamics that we're dealing with today. I actually went back and looked at previous scorecards going back as far as 2000, and it's really interesting. You can see the growing divide between the two parties in terms of support for the environment very, very clearly. We're back in 2000. I mean, the Republican Party wasn't even great back then, but there were a lot of Republicans who often voted with us on things. And then among Democrats, there were a lot of Democrats who didn't vote with us all that often. So it was much more heterogeneous in that way. But over the years, it really has become polarized to where Democrats are almost uniformly nearly at 100%, and Republicans are almost at zero. What does this imply for us? And it's not the only indicator, of course, but for what our job is moving forward into the future.
I think a couple things. One, I think what we see over and over, or seen, as you said, in more recent times, and certainly this administration and this Congress, are really saying, we're going to do whatever's in the best interest of polluters. And that connects into who backs their campaigns. It connects into who's just frankly, become an integral part of the Republican Party infrastructure. Big oil, King Coal, still hanging on, certainly with this president, and other fossil fuel interests that have staked their claim with Republicans, Republican leaders, rank and file, Republican members. And then what we see is policy outcomes that benefit polluters and hurt us. What I think this means for our job is we've got to make sure that we can do an effective job at conveying to people, conveying to voters that is not in their self-interest, and to not always have a conversation that can be a bit esoteric, a bit out there, carbon in the atmosphere and climate change. Of course, we care deeply about that, and those are conversations we should have. But when it gets down to voting, we all know, and certainly we've seen that in 2025 with the elections that happened there, affordability.
Mm-hmm.
And so really make sure that people understand, with the rise of AI and data centers and more extreme weather, and which takes down more of our energy infrastructure that then has to be replaced and modernized. All those are huge demands and expenses on energy, on
Yeah, yeah,
utility bills right now. And so when you try to yank clean energy out of the system, it drives prices higher. So what we can do to try to get outside these partisan boxes, Pete, is we can make it about what is best for, just everyday folks, us, all of us. Those are lower energy prices. Doing that, I think, can help make this not about a Republican or Democratic issue, but a pro-people agenda. And that,
yeah.
I think, is something we need to try to do more and more of as we address these sharply partisan divides.
Relating issues to the real world lived experience of people. Yeah, absolutely critical. Especially, I have been fond of saying, you can't really just keep talking about climate change and focusing on polar bears and interdecadal incremental increases in average temperatures, because that just doesn't really nail it for people.
That's not lived experience.
That's right.
Waking up
Exactly.
and figuring out
Exactly.
how to pay the rent and groceries and healthcare and energy bills, that's a lived
Yeah.
experience. And
Yeah.
we have a huge role to play in that story. And so that's what we want to do.
Yeah. Well, and it's absolutely nuts that Trump has taken off the table the cheapest and fastest ways to add electricity to the grid by getting rid of efficiency, blocking solar, blocking wind,
Yeah.
even battery storage. It's at a time when we've got data centers that are demanding more and more energy, more and more water, and creating more and more problems for people
Sure.
who live in the communities where they're being situated. So how do we connect our issues to affordability, particularly during an election cycle, without losing the connection to climate or health or the other environmental issues that relate? Because I think we do want to see a party that's more friendly to our issues actually in power, but we also want to make sure that they remember, environment, climate. We've got to deal with these things that so directly affect people's lives.
That's undoubtedly true. And again, I think energy affordability is the entry point to do exactly that. But that doesn't mean that's the only place where the conversation ought to be, right? we need to, first off, we do have to make sure it's clear that clean energy and affordability is a voting issue, because people understand their energy bills are too high. They don't always understand that political decisions impact that, right? Again, the fact
Yeah.
that Trump and the Republicans in charge of this Congress are taking clean energy away, which is the cheapest and the fastest to bring online. So that's how I think we start the conversation. Reminding people this is a political issue. This is an opportunity to make your life more manageable, more affordable by addressing these high energy bills. This is the way to do that. Having the cheapest and fastest energy to bring on the grid. Again, that's clean energy. And then making sure that we're connecting that to other parts of their lives that matter so much as well, right? So, look at, something as sounding as a kind of wonky and out there as the endangerment finding, which, you and I know what that means, but most folks are like, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. Well, what that basically says is we're going to let polluters pollute, and we're not going to do anything to stand in their way. That's something that this administration just did a week or so ago. That can connect into people's lives when they're going to the hospital with more asthma attacks, when there's higher incidence of asthma, when there's more heart attacks, when their lives are less healthy, when their families are less healthy. And that is the consequence of that decision that the Trump administration made. That is the consequence. Again, you might start the conversation around energy affordability because that's day to day. We all have to pay a utility bill, like we pay our rent or mortgage and buy groceries, et cetera, et cetera. But then you can get into other things that connect in with people's lived experience, like health. That connects into air, connects into water, and other things what this administration is doing. The other thing I'll say is I gave the story at the beginning. I'm a Westerner. I'm a Coloradan. And while this is true universally around the country, I'll tell you, I'm in the West in this country. You want to go selling off public lands. People do not like that idea. Those are that's our shared heritage. That's when you go to camp and hike and hunt and fish and recreate in all manner of ways. And so again, when this administration or Republicans in Congress try to sell off public lands, that's another way to have an environmental conversation with people that resonates with their everyday lives.
That's an issue that really cuts across partisan divides. I've never seen so much pushback from deep red conservative groups on a proposal like you're referring to Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who keeps trying to get language inserted into bills to allow them to sell off public lands.
That's right.
And it's absolutely across the board that people do not like that idea.
Well, that's right. And you know what, our Montana, I talked about what makes LCV, in my view, so special is our conservation voters movement, our state affiliates. Well, we have an affiliate in Montana. They're totally fantastic. They work on public lands all the time because public lands are a way of life in Montana. They were holding rallies in opposition, of course, to Mike Lee's attempt to sell off public lands. And they had people showing up in red MAGA caps, right? Now, clearly, I'm sure on a bunch of issues, they don't agree. Probably if they had said this is a rally on climate change, those same folks, there's no way they would have showed up. But it was to keep public lands in public hands. And they were welcomed in, not because we agree on everything, but because we agree on that. They agree on that. And that's the way to build some bipartisan connectivity. That's the way to find common ground across political ideology. It doesn't solve everything. It doesn't make all these issues bipartisan all the time. I know that. But it's a step in that direction. Plus, we have to keep public lands in public hands.
Wow, we are pushing buttons on a number of things I wanted to ask you about. I'm going to start with the communications piece. So it's one thing when we know what we want to say and have figured out, people care about this. But these days, there's an even greater challenge in getting a message to people because the information ecosystem has become so fragmented. I think we all know, this thing. There's no, we don't just have 3 network news broadcasts anymore. You can go pick whatever information source suits you the most. And so we're dealing with an ever increasing number of shrinking audience segments that, show up or tune into this platform or that podcaster or, that TikToker. Which presents a real challenge. And that's something that the right has been investing in and really figuring out how to dominate this space for at least the last decade. I mean, it goes back further than that. How does LCV grapple with this about getting the message in front of the eyes and ears of the people you're trying to reach? Because I think it's a problem that the whole left is struggling with, so I'm not picking on LCV. But just curious, how are you approaching it and thinking about it?
Well, I think all of us in the climate movement and other movements as well obviously need to, really rethink how we do communications. I know we are at LCV. We have a phenomenal communications team that does all sorts of great work, but we also have to, we want to speak to legacy media. We want to speak to new media. Also, we often don't want to be the ones speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there are content creators that are putting together really good, compelling content that drives a point about protecting public lands or tackling climate change or, pushing to lower energy bills through more clean, cheaper energy, right? When those voices are catching hold, when they're doing something that's really getting some traction, let's work with and use those opportunities to reach ears and eyes that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. I think a big thing that we struggle with, I don't just mean LCV, is to think about our work from a cultural perspective.
Yeah.
And not just a policy, certainly not a policy or a political perspective. Most folks in this country don't wake up in the morning and think about environmental policy or probably any policy, or really probably wake up and think about politics on a regular basis. Maybe
Yep.
right before an election they do, but mostly they don't. But they do wake up and think about whether it's the TV, movie, streaming show happening or shows that, that they're connected with, whether it's music, fashion, all sorts of other sports, things that are happening in this country. How can we access eyes and ears through those cultural connectivity? I mean, look, the State of the Union this week was painful for so many reasons. One, it was bloody long. It went on forever.
Yeah.
And of course, the content was, terrible. But I'll tell you what, I'm a big hockey fan. I remember in 1980 when the men's team won the gold medal, and then of course they won it in Milan, which is great. Having the hockey team there, I mean, there's all sorts of different takes on that. I don't mean to endorse that. What I mean to say is that's an example of engaging people through culture, in this case, obviously sports. So whether you liked it or didn't like it, there's plenty about that I didn't like. I want to be clear. It still was a cultural connection.
Yeah.
And I think we need to think more expansively, more creatively, and more opportunistically about making those cultural connections with people.
I think that's right. Donald Trump really is a master, and I think he is a proof point of how you can use culture to wield power. And as much as I detest just about everything about him, in some ways he does know what he's doing. And this is one of them. I spoke with Reverend Yearwood of Hip Hop Caucus a while ago about organizing through culture.
Yeah.
And I still find it challenging to figure out, how do you make climate into a cultural thing or environment? How do we weave it in to what's going? How are you at LCV approaching that? Have you figured it out? I mean, are there some answers emerging, or is it still like we're trying to figure out that, how do we do this?
We're trying a lot of, I would not say we figured it out. We're trying a lot of different things. One thing we're doing is staying close and paying attention and working closely with the Rev, Rev Yearwood. He's on our board. We work with the Hip Hop Caucus. A lot of our state affiliates work with, the Hip Hop Caucus in the particular states where they're active. So I think that's one thing that we can do is learn from others,
Hmm.
see what experiments are out there, see what people are trying that works that then we'll replicate or we'll just partner with them when it really gets some liftoff and some connectivity. I think, what we've found is, you take something, I mean, I mentioned the endangerment finding, which again is a very heady policy way to think about it, talk about it. But when Matthew Davis on our team was on Good Morning America about it, again, he was talking about impacts to people's lives. When this administration says they're literally no longer going to value human life at any amount. They're not
Yeah.
going to, put a dollar value on human life. They're just going to think about the cost to a polluter, how much it costs a polluter to comply. That's bananas.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people do get that. And I think there's cultural opportunities to come into that conversation. And we saw whether it's Matthew on Good Morning America and then obviously doing a lot to continue to draw eyeballs to that. It's not just that segment, but segments like that, whether it's finding ways to engage people on the fact that this administration is saying that human life doesn't have a dollar value, but we're just going to worry about how much corporations have to spend
Yeah.
your air and your water clean. Um, those are the kinds of things we're looking for, those moments to marry what's happening in our environmental or political environmental space with culture, and then jumping on it and running with it. We don't always get it right. We're still figuring it out, but we're trying really hard to do that.
Well, we're definitely in a time when experimentation and willingness to try things out is really important, because it's not only communications that's changed so much in the last, I mean, 10, 25 years. Sort of how politics works. It's how a lot of things have changed. Are there other ways that you think about we need to adapt or sort of evolve our approach, either LCV or just, I often just also look movement wide? Because I think that at least those of us on, the more progressive side of things would really like to get back to a place where we're the ones driving environmental policy and other policies.
Sure.
And there's healthcare, tax, economic. I mean, there's all kinds of policies, all kinds of things that Americans really need that are simply being ignored right now, as this president and his dutiful Congress just focus on either grifting or just focusing on the culture wars in order to try to maintain their hold on power. And it presents a huge challenge, I think, for the rest of us is, how do we deal with that? What other adaptation or evolution do you think about is needed?
Well, experimenting all the time is absolutely one way to do that. So here's a for example, we've talked some about the big ugly bill, the Republican reconciliation bill, that making people's lives more expensive with higher energy prices, higher energy bills. We want to draw attention to that. We want to make sure that people understand that their member of Congress, their Republican member of Congress, supported that bill, which is having negative impacts in their lives. So there's a congressional district in Michigan where we've got organizers on the ground who are collecting stories, visually, digitally on their phone. That's not terribly new, but
Mm-hmm.
we collect a bunch of these stories and then turn them very quickly into much more kind of organic style ads. But these are more almost like homemade style ads. They're not
Mm-hmm.
slickly produced, that a presidential campaign would do or anything like that. We test them really quickly, find out, which of those are going to work well and not work as well, and then put them up on social channels, like on a, put them up on YouTube and do it in the same geographical area where we collected the story.
Yeah.
It's like a neighbor speaking to a neighbor about why they are angry, why they are upset that their member of Congress voted to raise their utility bills. That's something that we wouldn't have been doing, something like that. Certainly not 4 or 6 years ago, probably really not even
Yeah.
a year or two ago, to be honest with you. That's the kind of thing we're doing. We're seeing some pretty good results from it. Again, it's not perfect. It's not that I think that style of communications is going to solve all of our problems, but we are learning from it. We're having
Hmm.
some good results. We're going to continue to, you know, refine it and tweak it and hone it, and then take things like that we learn and really try to move them up to a bigger, um, to blow them up on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great example because it gets at one of the areas that I think about in terms of adaptation, which is that public trust in institutions in general has fallen so precipitously in the last 10 years that, having a big, well-known institution put something out with its name on it that says something, it just doesn't carry the weight that it used to. People pay much more attention to content and messaging that they're hearing from someone that they think looks like them, probably shares values, shares experience. I really, it's great that you're doing local stories and then pushing them in the same place to preserve that. That's terrific. And one of the oh, technology is really interesting because we can do rapid and pretty cheap testing of messages so much more now than we used to.
That's right.
One of the areas that I think is a real dilemma, and I'm just curious your thoughts on this, is AI. So there's a huge downside to AI, which is that you need these data centers, which suck up massive amounts of energy and water and create lots of related problems. And so, probably most in our community have very mixed feelings about it for that reason, or staying away from it. But it also has tremendous potential, and potential which certainly the other side is using to generate. I mean, just the volume of AI generated slop is just growing. And it's going to keep growing, but it's going to be applied politically. I mean, it already is applied politically. If you saw, speaking of hockey, the one with Donald Trump, AI imagined as one of the hockey players. But I worry about the other side building a lot more tools with AI to generate content and then to amplify it with like just the sheer number of bot accounts you can have to propel a message out. I worry that it's going to be really hard for us to catch up if we can't figure out some way to make use of AI. It does feel like an arms race. So I guess let me test that. Does that strike you that way? This is kind of an arms race. And how have you thought about how to navigate this challenge of it? This is a tool which could be very potent, which might even be arguably essential if we're to stay in the same arena as the people who are working against our interests. But how do we balance these things?
Yeah. Well, and it's a good question. The example that I just gave about the work in this Michigan congressional district, we actually are using AI as part of that work. So when an organizer films that video that I described, they're uploading it, and it's an AI produced, this kind of homemade, looking, or not slick and glossy type of ad. Then
Mm-hmm.
obviously we've got humans looking at that and editing it and, making sure that it all works. So it isn't just straight from AI out. That's irresponsible. Would never do that. We thought about, is that something we're comfortable doing? It allows us to generate far more content, to test far
Mm-hmm.
more content once we've revised it and we're comfortable with it, mind you, to test it. And that then means we can communicate more effectively with more people. So that's an example of, yeah, we're comfortable with it. There's lots of other examples out there for sure. And I do think, look, we can't bury our head in the sand and say, well, we have some qualms about AI, and I certainly have qualms about AI. But we have qualms about it, and so we're going to act as if it's not there and just do things the way we used to, while others race forward with it for good and for ill. So, I think we have to be wide-eyed. We have to be thoughtful. We have to be careful. We have to understand what we're okay with and what we're not. Those are all important questions to ask. But we have to evolve in how we communicate with people and how we create content and how we engage out there in the world. I think if we don't, we'll be left behind
Yeah.
pretty quickly. And the
Yeah.
stakes are way too high. We have to win. Um,
Yeah.
if we want to protect the people and on this planet and the planet itself, which is to tackle climate change, we have to win political campaigns to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also pretty hard to avoid. I mean, if you just do a Google search, AI is kicking in and there goes a liter of water or half a liter
Absolutely.
of
I mean, I
water.
think everyone's using AI every time they, in many ways, even if they might not fully think about it or think about it all the time, but that's our.
It helps me. It helps me edit podcasts and produce a podcast, actually. So
There you
yeah, it is. It's hard to get away from. Um, one of the things that I've thought about, and this might be a tough question, but you mentioned we're in an era of we've got authoritarianism under Donald Trump, and I have no doubt he wants to lock that in as much as he possibly can. Um, and part of that includes trying to destroy organizations that are speaking against him or his agenda, or at least repress them or suppress them. And we've seen a lot of that with them going after law firms, universities, environmental groups, and other advocacy groups. And one of the questions I think is really important in times like this is, how do we grapple with the question of collective action? Meaning, I think a lot of people wondered, well, hey, if no, I can't remember the name of the law firm, I'll forget it.
Weiss. Well, Weiss.
Paul White. Okay, I was thinking that, but that didn't sound right. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah.
They were singled out, and I think they were one of the first one, and so they were like, yikes, I don't want to be in the crosshairs, so they bowed down. And I think there's a really strong institutional incentive to keep your head down, try not to get noticed. This will pass over. We don't want to make ourselves a target. But if all the civic institutions do that, we are definitely going to be stuck with an authoritarianism. But it's challenging to get groups to go, okay, yeah, we've got to integrate like resistance to authoritarianism into what we're doing. Is that something that LCV is sort of tussling with and trying to figure out where do we want to land on this in terms of balancing the natural inclination to avoid problems like that with there's a great social need for groups to stick together and push back.
Yeah, I mean, collective action is always powerful and often the antidote when authoritarianism arrives. I think so. We work on democracy issues. Now, we work on democracy issues because we believe that without a healthy and functioning democracy, we cannot solve the climate crisis. We cannot effectively protect our air and our land and our waters without a healthy and functioning democracy. So, right now, what that means is we need to make sure we have free and fair elections. Again, for us, a large part of that is our state affiliates. When there's anti-voter bills happening in the states, working to make sure those don't become law. When there's pro-voter bills to expand the franchise and make sure people have, good access to polling places and all the, connectivity around our elections, that our affiliates are often supporting those or engaged in helping those to become law in the states. Things like, federally and the SAVE Act, which again, you heard Trump tout during the State of the Union, which would significantly restrict who can vote and would make it much, much harder for millions of people to vote in this country. So obviously that's the kind of thing that we're opposed to and will continue to be opposed to, all because having a healthy functioning democracy is a prerequisite to tackling the great environmental challenges of our day, climate change being first and foremost,
Mm-hmm.
clean air, clean water, and our public lands,
Yeah.
as I've mentioned. And so that's how we think about it. And we want to stand with others in coalition. We're not going to lead many of those efforts because at core we're an environmental group, but we're going to show up. We're going to lend the muscle, political muscle, I mean, that we have, the expertise, what we can bring into the arena. We'll do that to make sure we have free and fair elections moving forward. So that's how we think about it at LCV.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the whole notion of standing together when an authoritarian threat has arrived is vital.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so of course, we hope with the next elections to have some rational people in charge of the House or maybe the whole Congress again. And then, of course, 2028 will hopefully bring around a change in leadership, which raises the question of we've lost a lot of ground, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of intellectual infrastructure from the EPA, from the DOJ, from, I mean, really across the entire federal government. But just thinking about environmental policy, and of course, we've gone so backwards on a lot of environmental policies.
Yeah.
I hear and read about, there's discussions about how do we rebuild or how do we build anew, with a particular point being there's some who argue, we can't just try to restore what was there. That poses certain difficulties, but also there were dissatisfactions with how things worked.
Yeah.
You look at our democracy or even how federal agencies worked, which contributed to where we are now. So maybe we need a new way of thinking about how do we achieve these goals? How are we going to get our carbon pollution under control and more clean energy going forward? How are you tackling that? To me, it seems like a process of thinking through what do we want, what's next after Trump, that we want to start thinking about how we build it. But what does it look like? What's the architecture, the structure, or the process for trying to think about that?
Well, I think what you said is spot on in the sense that I don't think we can just assume that the goal is to rebuild everything as it was. I think we need to reflect on, in part, how we got to this moment. People are angry. People do not feel like the system, the government works for them. So to say we are going to recreate the thing that didn't really deliver the kind of results that you want to see in your life, that is a losing political message. And I don't think is going to get us the outcomes that we need to build broad-based support. Remember, starting from my story of it's linking arms with people, it's people power. We have to show up and matter to their lives. And that means that we need to have structures and policies that are designed to do that. Know exactly what those look like. I think it's going to take a lot of thinking, and I'm not going to, be the person to say it ought to be exactly this or exactly that.
Yeah.
Obviously, we at LCV will be a part and will be a part of those conversations moving forward. But we have to think differently than we have in the past, and we have to center how it impacts people's lives and how they experience it. I think if that's something that we start there, knowing that we have to cut carbon pollution. I mean, my goodness, we have got to cut carbon pollution like mad, but let's do that in a way that connects in and matters to people's everyday lives, which again, there is a very obvious and urgent starting point, which is to deploy as much clean energy as we can, absolutely as fast as we can, because that will help to address these skyrocketing utility bills. That will speak to people's everyday lives. And obviously, as we have this surge in demand, we were just talking about AI and data centers, as we have in the old utility infrastructure, much of which, or a fair amount of which, needs to be replaced. As all of that is happening, we've got clean energy to power and clean energy to address it. So that's for sure the first thing. But we can't just plan to rebuild what used to be there. That's not a winning strategy.
Yeah. That's another area where I think it's kind of an interesting opportunity to be able to reimagine a whole bunch of stuff in a new form that works better. So we're just about at the end of our time. So I've got my traditional last question, which is, what is a piece of advice that you got that was really formative for you, or that you'd want to pass on to others?
Yeah. I think a great piece of advice that somebody gave me is that everybody needs hope and heroes. And that as we do this work, let's make sure we're finding ways to offer people hope, and we're lifting up heroes that are doing this work. And those could be leaders, those could be rank and file, people that their name in lights, or people who, are not known outside of their immediate circle, right? The
Mm-hmm.
point is, we have to believe, and we have to give people belief. And if we do that, people will show up, whether it's literally showing up to vote, whether it's showing up at the rally, whether it's
Yeah.
taking an action, whether it's making a contribution to support the great work of groups like LCV and our allies out there. We have to give people hope and heroes. So that's part of what we work to do here.
That's great. Pete, thank you so much for your time. This has been really fun conversation, and thank you for joining us.
Pete, I really appreciate the invitation. I've enjoyed the conversation, and thank you very much.
You bet.
Thanks for tuning into The Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy. The podcast is produced by Prismatic Strategies to share wisdom and insights from leaders in the field. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Music was written by Andrea Perry and Pete Altman. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who care about making a difference. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. Thanks again, and see you next time.